You're watching Inside the Right. So, Tim, we've got some major news out of Arizona. We've got yet another far-right state Supreme Court, which has ruled to allow a draconian abortion ban to take effect. This one written in 1864. So Kari Lake quickly came out with a statement disavowing the decision, which, of course, was to disguise her true position, which she shared here.
My personal belief is that all life matters, all life counts, and all life is precious, and I don't believe in abortion. I think the older law is going to go into effect. That's what I believe will happen.
Okay, but you approve of that? At conception?
I believe life begins at conception.
Okay, what do we do about abortion pills? What do we do about...
I don't think abortion pills should be legal. That's a very
not in Arizona.
All right, Tim, is she going to be able to run away from this?
Doesn't get much clearer than that, Brian. Boy, a lot of times Trump is good at kind of using weasel words, and he has this word salad, and his sentences are like streams that turn left to turn right. And so, but Kari Lake is like, that's like 8 words right there. It's just a straight thing. Like, yes, I support it. I support the territorial ban. Territorial, it's important to get that. It's because the law was in effect when Arizona was a territory. Arizona didn't become a state till 1912. So This is from before Arizona was a state, this law. I don't know. I think maybe one of the punishments was that you had to have a duel, out there. Like when this shit was written. I mean, it's crazy that they upheld this. It's all Republicans on the Supreme Court there. And it was 4 that were appointed by the most recent governor, Ducey, and 2 that were appointed by the previous governor, Jan Brewer. And so, I think that Kari Lake is in a huge bind here. She can try to get out of it, but the ads are that Ruben Gallego, her Democratic opponent, are going to be able to run, are going to be absolutely devastating on this front. And Gallego has more money than Lake, similar to the Trump situation. Lake has not done as well fundraising, and so Gallego is already on TV. I wouldn't be surprised to see an ad with that clip on Phoenix TV by the time this thing gets up on YouTube. Who knows how quick?
Do you think voters buy it when these politicians revise their positions on blatantly unpopular issues like abortion? Like, is that redefinition that they're going for possible, or do you think that voters know that what they're trying to pull?
Sometimes situationally it's possible. I'm thinking about like gay marriage, for example. A lot of people change their views. Right? If voters can say, oh man, I changed my view on this too, right? Like, so I get it. It evolved over time. But in issues instances as blatant as this, with somebody like Kari Lake, who's so phony, obviously, I just think it's hard for her to get away with it. And we've seen this time and again where Trump has really done better than a lot of like the Trump imitators, because of just the nature of him being, a former reality show guy, and like the whole taking him literally not seriously thing. Like Trump gets some leash to get away with this stuff, and I think we can talk about him and how much he'll be damaged by this as well. But Kari Lake doesn't get any leash, and I think that the voters are going to see right through this. And it was just an abundantly clear statement that she supported the 0-week ban, no exceptions, only life of the mother exception. And I just don't know how you wiggle out of it, especially when you now are going to be dealing with, if you're these Republicans, real life consequences from this, in Arizona in an election year. And it's just, right. I think it's just disastrous for Kari Lake.
Right. There's going to be more videos, more instances, more anecdotes of people who are having their rights restricted. And it's only going to get worse for Republicans, not better, as we head into November when more of these stories are going to come out. More rape victims, more incest victims, more, people who were forced to carry non-viable fetuses to term. I mean, that's just going to it's going to compound for Republicans. It's only going to get worse, not better. You had mentioned Trump. Can you talk about the timing of the fact that he had come out just one day prior and tried to hedge his bets by saying, well, I support making this a states' rights issue, only for Arizona to turn around and implement an 1864 abortion ban?
That asshole Trump has gotten good luck a couple of times recently, in these court cases and whatnot. And so it's nice when he gets some bad luck. And the timing on this for Trump is just a nightmare. I mean, literally, he knew abortion was a big problem for him. He privately, if you talk to anybody that speaks to Trump advisors or to anyone in that world, they say that like Trump doesn't care about this issue, obviously. And so he's been trying to figure out how he can get credit for the overturn of Roe with the base that he's going to need to turn out, while also not any of the blame, right? And this is classic Trump. And so, he's been trying to strategize. How do I get out of it? How do I get out of it? He didn't have to put out a statement yesterday. He decides yesterday morning to put out this video where he's decided his way out of it is to say, I just believe we'll leave this up to the states. Like whatever the states do is right. And we'll see how that goes. And then one day later, a key state that he's going to need to win in November says, okay, we're changing our law to take it back to 1864. I mean, you have to laugh. Obviously, there's some serious like real life consequences, but just the horrific timing, the horrific optics for Trump, the fact that he just is stepping on a huge rake here on an issue that the whole point of his statement yesterday was trying to avoid something like this. And he just walked right into it. His spokeswoman was on one of those far right outlets today. I forget which one. And she said that she affirmed that the former president believes that we should believe in states' rights and that states should be able to do what they want. So he essentially now owns this 1864 law in Arizona, like just a total catastrophe and a self-own that was unnecessary for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Tim, is there any worry that with these abortion referendums on the ballot, like there are going to be these abortion referendums on the ballot now in Arizona, in Florida, in Montana, New York, a bunch of other states, that they can backfire in the sense that pro-choice Republican voters can have their cake and eat it too. They can protect abortion rights through the ballot initiatives, but then also elect their party and kind of divorce them from this issue?
I think that is possible in certain cases. And I think we might have talked about this with regards to Florida. Florida's a red state, so there's a lot at this point. And there's a lot of these kind of MAGA secular voters in Florida that don't really like the abortion stuff. And so they can go have their vote and still vote for Trump. There'll be some of those voters in Arizona. But man, the swing voter in Arizona is different, right? Like the Arizona electorate is very different, and and Trump and Lake are gonna need my people, like the former Republican suburban college educated types in the Phoenix suburbs, the John McCain voter, the Doug Ducey voter, the Jeff Flake voter. That's why they lost Arizona. I mean, part of it there's been Democratic excitement and turnout, young voters on campus, et cetera. It's not just this group, but it's been a pretty key group, right? That Kerry Lake and Trump in back-to-back elections just hemorrhaged, support among this group. A lot of women, right? A lot of college educated women living in the suburbs, and that had been Republican voters. And I think that these voters in Arizona look at this now and are just like, we need to just throw these people out and start from scratch, right? And so I don't know. I think it's really bad for them in Arizona. I think there are other states, more conservative states with different kind of demographic makeups where your point might make sense. Ohio might be a place, Florida. But in Arizona, I think it's really bad news.
Yeah, I mean, I think people see the crazy on display, and they recognize that the abortion bans, these 1864 abortion bans, aren't a bug of the party; they're a feature. This is what you get when you vote for this Kerry Lake type MAGA Republican, and that's the Republican Party that's taken over. So at this point, like you're not gaining anything by kind of extracting certain issues out of the party, because it's the same extremism that they're going to display on every issue. And so it's not just like you get to take out abortion and still have that with a ballot measure, because on issue after issue after issue, whether it's guns, whether it's democracy, whatever it is, they're going to have that same far right extremism on display.
Yeah, and in Arizona, just really quick, they're seeing this up close and personal so much because their candidates have been so extreme, right? Like they've had these very close races, so a lot of advertising. Like the voters there are very attuned to how extreme Republicans have gotten in Arizona, maybe more than anywhere, because there's a percentage of Arizonans that like that, right? And they've chosen it. And then there's another percentage that have just been totally turned off by it. And if you look at the state legislature, the Arizona Freedom Caucus or whatever put out a statement just a little bit ago that said, like, abortion is murder. We totally support this 1864 thing. No compromise, no anything. And so, I think that the fact that this is what this MAGA Arizona Republican Party wants is going to be abundantly clear to voters in the state. And we've seen the last two elections already that there's that maybe not as many as we'd hope, but there's a small majority of the state of former Republicans and then Democrats that are coming together and saying, no, we don't want this.
Yeah, which shouldn't be a surprise, by the way, because even these MAGA Republicans are out there saying that they don't want the John McCain type Republicans voting for them. And so the John McCain Republicans, you guys are basically saying, all right, no problem. Like, and they
Yeah,
voted
we're gone.
accordingly. Yeah.
And they're hoping to offset it. This is the problem. They're hoping to offset it with like Hispanic voters, working class Hispanic voters. And again, I mean, do working class Latinos in Arizona want a 0-week abortion ban, life of the mother? So it's hard to see where the Republican gains are in this state when you're going that extreme.
Let's finish off with this. These ballot initiatives have been on the ballot in 6 different states now, and pro-choice voters have won out in all of them, and that includes states like Ohio, Kentucky, Kansas, and Michigan. So not exactly liberal bastions, even though Michigan does have a Democratic trifecta right now. Can you help me understand what Republicans are doing by continuing to back something that is so aggressively unpopular?
Yeah, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place in this one, Brian, because the Republicans are so nihilistic in the Trump era on almost every issue. It's kind of like, whatever, we just want to own the libs. But there's a key segment of the party for whom abortion is actually earnest, right? And they really do believe that life is a baby, and that and killing that baby is murder. And in a lot of ways, that allows them to feel like they have the moral high ground, against the Democrats on other issues. And so they can't sacrifice that. So it's not every Republican. Obviously, Kerry Lake's a total fake and she'll say whatever. Right? But like there's enough of the voters that for whom this is central that these MAGA Republicans feel like they have to, go along on this one. And then there's some of those people are elected officials and they genuinely believe this and they're genuinely radical on this. So, and then there's misogyny, there's some other elements that go into this, but I think that because of that, they're kind of stuck with this. And Trump was their best potential way out of it because people kind of get that he doesn't really care about this deep down. But he's just bungled it so badly. Yeah. And it was his Supreme Court nominees that did it, that I just think that they're stuck with this anchor and there's no way around it.
Well, I mean, speaking about Arizona and speaking about these pro-democracy Republicans who are defecting away from that party, that brings me to the point that it is so important that we build up this pro-democracy ecosystem. So for people watching right now, if you want to support the work that Tim and his team at The Bulwark are doing, please subscribe to The Bulwark's YouTube channel. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Again, it's so important to elevate. You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So we've got a bombshell issue from today's trial against Trump in New York. But first, just a reminder for those watching, Glenn and I will be doing daily comprehensive coverage of the entirety of Trump's first criminal prosecution right now. So if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, Glenn, talk about what prosecutors just revealed in court.
Brian, in case the Trump trial wasn't weird enough up in New York, it looks like Donald Trump entered into a do not snitch contract with his former chief financial officer and current criminal associate, Alan Weisselberg. And no, you can't make this stuff up. So today, the prosecutors offered into evidence, or they indicated to the judge they want to introduce into evidence, a contract, a severance contract that Trump and the Trump Organization entered into with Alan Weisselberg. And get this, Alan Weisselberg gets a $750,000 bonus if he doesn't tell on Donald Trump. No, I'm not making it up. Here is what the details of the contract involve. The severance package says, if Alan Weisselberg agrees not to cooperate with law enforcement authorities against Donald Trump or against the Trump Organization, he gets 3 payments of $250,000 each. Now, in fairness, there is an exception. The exception says, well, if he is subpoenaed, then he must comply with a lawful subpoena, but he may not cooperate voluntarily and criticize or denigrate or essentially say anything bad about Donald Trump or the Trump Organization. So I have characterized this as a do not snitch contract, and both parties, the prosecution and Donald Trump's defense attorneys, are arguing over whether this contract, kind of another hush money contract in substance, should be introduced into evidence before this jury that is currently trying Donald Trump for paying hush money, criminally falsifying business records to cover up the true nature of those hush money payments, all to gain unfair advantage in the 2016 presidential election. I mean, this case has more twists and turns than a great adventure roller coaster.
Glenn, so as not to bury the lead here, is it a crime to tamper with a witness by inducing them not to testify with money?
It is a crime to tamper with a witness. That is, I've tried witness tampering cases. It's also a crime to, urge somebody to aid and abet a crime. But, they're trying to basically urge Alan Weisselberg not to aid and abet a law enforcement investigation or prosecution of Donald Trump. And, let's get down into kind of the criminal law weeds here. I actually don't think, as I look through what's been reported about this agreement, I don't think it is strictly speaking criminal. Here's why I say that. Because basically it says, listen, we will pay you a bonus, or we will pay you additional money as part of a severance package if you don't voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement. Now, if you have a legal obligation to testify, for example, if you're placed before a grand jury, or if you are subpoenaed to testify at trial, well, you can testify. We're not urging you to lie. We're not urging you to disobey a lawful compulsion to provide information or testimony. We are simply entering into a contract with you, an agreement whereby you get $750,000 if you don't voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement. So here's the thing, Brian. I tried to get voluntary cooperation from witnesses all the time. We would invite them to the U.S. Attorney's Office for voluntary interviews. Law enforcement would go to their homes, knock on the door, and say, listen, we'd like to interview you down at the police station or at the FBI field office. We would like you to come to the U.S. Attorney's Office and talk to the prosecutor. What people should know, because it's frankly within their rights, is they don't have to voluntarily cooperate with police, with prosecutors, with the FBI. But if there's a legal requirement or compulsion, like a grand jury subpoena or a trial court subpoena or some kind of a court order, then you do have to comply. And you can't enter into a written agreement where you will compensate somebody if they violate one of those legal duties. So, it's an ugly arrangement. It is a despicable and unseemly contract to enter into with somebody. But strictly speaking, I'm not sure that the contract in and of itself constitutes a crime. But it sure does explain why a guy like Alan Weisselberg would not make a trial appearance and testify against Donald Trump, criticize him, provide incriminating evidence against him. And that's why the prosecutors told Judge Merchan they want to introduce it into evidence, because they want to explain Alan Weisselberg's absence from the trial. Now, they don't want to call Alan Weisselberg. They've made that clear, in part because Alan Weisselberg is both a criminal associate of Donald Trump's and is a great big liar, because he's serving a sentence at Rikers Island for perjury, for having lied at Donald Trump's fraud trial to try to help Donald Trump. So the prosecutors don't want to put him on the stand. The defense attorneys are actually arguing they don't want him to testify, but they also don't want the jury to see this really ugly contract that Trump and the organization entered into with Alan Weisselberg. So lots of interesting arguments on both sides, and we can talk about how Judge Merchan has proposed sort of untying this knot and proceeding.
Okay, real quick, because I think it would introduce some poetic irony if Donald Trump has to pay out this $750,000 and the trial doesn't change at all by virtue of Weisselberg not testifying. So did we lose anything by virtue of Weisselberg not offering voluntary testimony?
We actually didn't. I don't think there's a juror in the... We actually didn't. I don't think there's a juror in the box in that New York trial who is thinking to themselves, Alan Weisselberg is one of Donald Trump's criminal associates in this hush money scheme and in the falsifying business records. So we don't really expect to see him as a witness because he was part of the crime. And I don't know whether they know he's serving time presently or not. That hasn't been introduced into evidence, but they might know about it from other sources. They're just not permitted to use it as part of their deliberations in the case. But I don't expect that the jurors are like dying to see or expecting to see Alan Weisselberg take the stand. So I don't really fully agree with the prosecutor's rationale for trying to introduce this contract to the jury, because I don't think the jury expects Weisselberg to testify. But here's what Judge Merchan has said. He said, well, first of all, have the parties asked Alan Weisselberg if he'll come in and testify, or if he'll testify under subpoena, which would be that legal compulsion? And both parties said to the judge, no, not really, which tells you everything you need to know about the fact that they don't really want Alan Weisselberg to testify. So the judge said, okay, well, here is what I am going to ask you to do. Approach Alan Weisselberg through his lawyer, ask if he's willing to come in and testify, because if he is, then you really can't introduce this contract that says he's not allowed to cooperate if, in fact, you could secure his testimony and put him on the stand. So it looks like the parties are going to take a step back. They're going to regroup. They're going to perhaps rethink the positions that they're staking out. But it may very well be that we see Alan Weisselberg bust over from Rikers Island and put on the stand in a hearing out of the presence of the jury. That happens not infrequently, Brian, when there's a legal issue that can only be resolved by having a witness on the stand and addressing whatever the legal issue is. And that is precisely what Judge Merchan just proposed. We can put him on the stand out of the hearing, out of the presence of the jury, and we will ask him, are you willing to testify? Now, I would probably bet my full buck. That's my maximum bet. I'm not a high roller. I would probably put the full buck on Alan Weisselberg if he's put in that position, saying, I am pleading the Fifth, because he undoubtedly has a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, because the evidence in this case has proved he's part of the hush money scheme and the falsifying business records, so he could potentially be on the hook for other crimes for which he hasn't yet been prosecuted, and he could incriminate himself if he were to testify. So I'm betting he would say, you know what? I'm going to decline to testify. I'm going to plead the Fifth, invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. I'm not declining to testify because of the severance contract, but I'm otherwise not going to testify. But all of these moving pieces now are kind of in play and under consideration. And on Monday, it will all come to a head, and we'll see what happens with Alan Weisselberg.
Glenn, if it is allowed for this contract to be shown to the jury, does the fact that Trump will dangle hush money for Alan Weisselberg not at least atmospherically also lead the jury to believe that it's more likely that he would use hush money for Stormy Daniels?
Absolutely, and here's what will happen.
Like this guy's like a hush money machine at this point.
He is. It's a hush money jubilee when it comes to Donald Trump. So here's what will happen. If it turns out that Judge Merchan rules the jury can see this severance agreement that requires Alan Weisselberg not to cooperate voluntarily with law enforcement authorities, he will allow it to be introduced into evidence, but it will come with what we call a limiting instruction. He will tell the jury, ladies and gentlemen, you may not use this as what we call propensity evidence. In other words, right to your point, Brian, you can't use this to say, well, he was kind of paying Alan Weisselberg hush money, so that's evidence that he probably paid Stormy Daniels hush money. That is not the purpose for which this piece of evidence is being introduced. You're only allowed to use it for the very limited purpose of explaining why Alan Weisselberg has not appeared as a witness in this case. Judges use limiting instructions all the time when a piece of evidence is admissible but is subject to multiple interpretations and perhaps subject to misuse to the detriment of the defendant. So if it comes in, it's going to come in with a limiting instruction.
But Glenn, these people are human. And if they see that Donald Trump has a propensity to write hush money contracts, isn't that going to at least subconsciously, at least atmospherically, lead them to believe that he has a higher propensity to do this?
Yeah, so this is where the common sense and the rule of law don't necessarily meet one another. They don't fit comfortably. Here's what I mean by that. In every trial, you will have evidence that gets blurted out by a witness that turns out to be inadmissible. What do we hear the judge say? Strike that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I am instructing you must disregard it, you must strike it from your mind, and you must not let it enter into your deliberations in this case. That is a necessary part of the practice of criminal law. It happens in virtually all criminal trials because people are human and trials are more art than science. They're unpredictable. So the reason that we have that rule in place is if we didn't, every time somebody blurted out something that was inadmissible, it would require a mistrial and you'd have to start all over again. So think about the incentive that would build into the system to have people blurting stuff out all the time. You could never try a case to fruition, to a verdict. So yes, they're human, but in my experience, Brian, when those jurors raise their right hand and swear to abide by all of the judge's instructions, they typically try their best to do it. But this is a fiction that we employ just to keep the criminal justice system up and running.
Yeah, it would be ironic, I feel like, if a document that was initially intended to help Donald Trump in trial may unto itself, just the document unto itself, not even what it was trying to protect against, which is Alan Weisselberg's testimony, but just the document actually ends up being more damaging than the testimony would have been.
Sweet karma, we call that. Sweet karma.
Well, we'll stay on top of this. Obviously, we'll have some updates here on Monday. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.